What a surprise. The Mets are losing again. And it's only the end of the first inning. As you can see with the Mets in their last couple of games, it has all been a steaming pile of shit as they have lost 110 out of their last 30 games. Really, ever since here on June 13th when they had a 5-1 lead and blew it, they've been a steaming pile of fecal matter. And it's gotten to the point. What do you do if you're the Mets? What do you do? Because, as you can see, the Mets, yeah, they may be in contention for the division. They may be. Look at the Phillies. The Mets are only 1.5 back of the Phillies. But it goes deeper than that. Goes deeper than them just being 1.5 back of the Phillies. Phillies aren't this god tier team either. They just aren't. They're a better team than the Mets, that's for sure. But Phillies have a lot of problems themselves. You look at the wild card standings though, and you start to see the Mets are now 3.5 games behind the Milwaukee Brewers. So the chance that they can jump the Brewers or the Cubs, whoever wins the NL Central, is really done and dusted. So the Mets owning a tiebreak against the Dodgers, another team that the Mets are behind by 3 games. And it would only matter if they win a division. The Mets tiebreak with the Dodgers, which I thought was going to be really helpful, it's going to turn out to be useless. They may be up 2 games against the Cubs and the Brewers, but how useful it's going to be still has to depend. Mets have lost their first 2 against the Reds. It's going to be almost impossible to win that tiebreaker. They haven't been the Padres and the Giants yet. The Mets are in a second wild card spot. They're 1.5 games from being in the third spot and 3 out from not being in the playoff picture altogether. And with the Reds being the Mets today, that number could very easily fall to just 2 games. The Mets at one point were in a playoff spot by 8.5 games and had a 5.5 game lead in the division at the same time. To blow that would truly be a historic collapse. And that's where the Mets are trending. 4-6 in their last 10 games on a 3-game losing streak. Their expected win-loss record is 54-45. So it's not like that you have this angle of statistical regression. A team that I could think of, that fits that regard, and where they're due is like the Braves. They're kind of due to, hit 500 at the very least. You have, that's just, like in the AL, you can think that, the Blue Jays, well, not really Blue Jays anymore, but, the Yankees are due for some improvement. Team that's due for regression. Oh, yeah, the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays are a team that's due for regression. But, you look at the Mets, and there's some clear problems. Their home record at one point 27-7. 6-9 in the last 15 home games. Now it's 33-16. Their win percentage at home, it went from being, from almost an 80% win percentage at home to being just over the 2/3 mark. And away, they're 22-28, so they're only winning 44% of the games on the road. They may have a 25-21 record over teams against 500, but aside from the Brewers and the Yankees, they haven't really beaten any good teams in series recently. Not to mention if the Royals do get above 500, then they would also join the statistics. So it's not always the best measure. The fact of the matter is, the Mets are in free fall. They're in free fall. Through 100 games last year, the Mets were 52-48. Now they're trying to be 55-45, which in theory is better. But even though that might be the case, the trajectories of the team are clearly different. And I don't think that the Mets are going to make the playoffs. Even if the Mets do make the playoffs, though, there's no shot of this team winning a championship. Against the Brewers in Milwaukee, the Mets needed a miracle last time to to beat them, and I feel like this might be very different for the Brewers if they come in on if the Mets are coming in as I feel like this might be a you know this might be what was I trying to say? You know, different if they're a wild card team, not division winner. That was not the video. This is the video. Like, if not for this, the Mets lose. I don't know if you heard the audio. You definitely saw the video. Like, if not for that shot, which gave the Mets the lead, then the Mets almost certainly lose that game. They were really bound to lose that series in Milwaukee, and you know, Devin Williams has really owned the Mets this year. But he's also on the Yankees, so you know. So there's that. Like the Mets are really a wild card exit at best. I guess if they have the matchup against the Phillies, it's possible that they could beat the Phillies in a wild card series. Then they got to go to Chicago or Los Angeles and play those teams. Like the Mets have no shot of winning a championship with their roster currently constructed as bad as it is. But that kind of got me thinking. What should the Mets do here? Because they can realistically buy or sell. And what the Mets can't do, and what I fear that they're going to do, is have a 2024 style trade deadline where they don't really make any big moves. In 2024, their strategy, I guess, worked in theory considering the Mets were in a playoff spot, but only barely in a playoff spot by half a game. So it wasn't a thing where, so it was a thing where you want to push to make the playoffs, but you don't want to go totally all in and destroy a future in what was set out to be a punt year. You look at you will ignore the early acquisitions for now of Pablo Reyes, Luis Torrens, and Julio Teheran. You have Phil Maton, who the Mets acquired on July 10th. You have Ryan Stanek from the Mariners on July 26th. July 28th, you have Jesse Winker from the Nationals. July 30th, they got Paul Blackburn. You have Paul Blackburn, and so that was the other acquisition. So you have those four guys, and they also acquired Brazaban. Of those, Brazaban had looked good at the start, but he's now starting to implode. He has a 5-2 win-loss record, but he has a lot of blown saves in the process, and a lot of those wins came off of games where he blew the save, but still earned the win. Stanek right now is 2-5, so he was actually pretty good for the Mets. Last year in the playoffs and decent in the regular season, aside from two bad outings. Blackburn last year went 1-2 with 5 starts against the Mets, logged an ERA of 5. He's 0-3 on the Mets this year, and probably is on a phantom IL stint. Maton's no longer even on a team right now. And Winker was pretty good for the first half. He really, led the Mets to a couple of wins, got hurt on May 4th against the Cardinals, came back July 6th against the Orioles, took 3 at-bats, got hurt again. So it was a pretty bad trade deadline. But for the year, it actually worked, seeing as the Mets rallied together to make the playoffs. In 2023, you look at the Mets trade deadline, And you can see they traded their closer David Robertson for the Miami Marlins on July 27th. They traded Scherzer away on the 29th. They traded Canna to the Brewers on the 31st. They traded Verlander to the Astros on August 1st. And they also gave Pham to the D-backs and Leon to the Angels. So they were clear sellers. You could see how they gave everyone away. 2022, was another not great deadline for the Mets. And that's a big reason why they fumbled the season in 2022, embarrassingly. I would honestly say 2022's collapse may have been worse than 2007's in the angle of 2007, they were never going to win a championship. 2022, there's a real chance they win a championship, and they fumbled. You look at the acquisitions. They got Vogelback. They got Naquin. They got Roof. They have Givens. They really didn't go all in, and that's why they sort of were mediocre down the stretch. 2021, another bad thing. They got Javier Baez giving away PCA in the process. PCA might win MVP this year, and Baez also was bad. They also got Trevor Williams, who did nothing. They got Rich Hill, who also did nothing. So again, pretty bad trade deadlines. The Mets don't know how to be buyers, I'll put it that way. Being sellers, though, help the team. So there's two options. You could go out there and try to get top-ranked prospects. But I don't trust Stearns to get any big names. He missed out on every single big-name pitcher. He didn't even want to re-sign Soto and Alonso. Steve Cohen did it for him, although he's more interested in antagonizing Mets fans. Stearns is really disconnected from the fan base. He didn't even show up on David Wright's number retirement day. He's a selfish piece of shit. Now, the Mets don't have to be sellers. They could. I mean, they don't have to be buyers. They could be sellers. They don't have to be sellers. They could be buyers, but they could be sellers too. And here's what I mean. Pete Alonso's contract allows him to opt out after this year. He's right now day-to-day. Right now he's day-to-day. And he's been balling out. His OPS, while it did fall below the 900 mark, it's still 892. He's still slugging in the 500s. Pete Alonso is looking like a very good player. He's fallen off a bit, but he still looks very good. But I doubt that the Mets are going to re-sign him at the price he's going to demand, seeing as Stearns is cheap. So instead of, in a year where the Mets have zero chance to win a championship, instead of keeping Pete Alonso on the team, having him opt out and getting nothing for him, why not get rid of him now, get a lot of prospects in return for him, and then either develop those prospects in a later run or trade those prospects for an actual good player in the future in the 2026 offseason when you recalibrate. Diaz, now there's a better chance of Stearns re-signing Diaz, but you have to look at Edwin Diaz and think he's another guy who's probably opting out of his contract at the end of this year. Diaz has 19 saves on the year. He's only blown one. His record as a pitcher, 4-0. Granted, one's on a blown save, but still. He was really shaky at the start of the year. He had a 4.91 ERA in the month of April. He's really toned it down since. He has allowed one earned run since. His ERA down to 1.66 on the year. Diaz is doing phenomenal. But again, Diaz is going to opt out. He's likely going to opt out. Are the Mets going to re-sign Diaz? Probably not. I know he's your star closer, but why not get rid of Diaz now? And again, get prospects out of him. Alonso and Diaz could be two of the biggest names in the market for people, and there's a lot of teams who need a first baseman. Certainly a lot of teams who need a superstar closer. Why not just part ways with them now and actually get a big return for them rather than waiting and then getting nothing out of them when they inevitably, do not, when they inevitably, do not stay on the team in 2026. Why not just do it now? The other guy who I was thinking that the Mets could trade, although this has been very controversial, is Lindor. I have never seen such a mid player get nearly as much glaze as Francisco Lindor. Francisco Lindor is just not a very good player. His OPS is 768. He's slugging only in the 400s. 2024, best season of his career, and the fact that he was second in MVP voting, and I'm saying this as a Mets fan, was so undeserved. He did good in the playoffs, I will admit. He had 2 home runs, one of which was a grand slam in the NLDS. He had an 877 OPS in the playoffs, which is pretty good. But again, Lindor was a guy who, in his best season as a Met, all he could do was muster up an 844 OPS and a 500 slugging percentage. His best year. That's all he does. I don't know why Lindor gets nearly as much glaze as he does. He actually had a pretty good April, which is unusual for Lindor, but he didn't. But he did decently in May. June, his numbers just completely fell off a cliff after they peaked early in the month. They fell off a cliff, and July's numbers have really been mediocre too. He has 3 home runs in July. Don't get me wrong, but he has not had a hit in his last 3 games, in which he's had 5 at-bats. Looking at the timing of when he got his hit in the Mets 3-1 win against the Royals on July 11th, which was July 12th, which was, by the way, the Mets' last win, as they're about to enter a 4-game losing streak, most likely, he is on an 0-for-17 slide. And this seems to happen far too often, where Lindor will just go into a terrible slump, and the whole team will fall behind in this. So you also notice how the Mets are feeble and they can't come back. Look at the San Francisco Giants, another team where they were trailing at 1.7-1 against the Blue Jays, or 7-2 against the Blue Jays. Now it's a 7-6 ball game, and this could very easily be a repeat of the Braves-Yankees game from yesterday, where it looks like the Blue Jays are in full control for a while, and then the Giants come all the way back. This is what real championship contending teams do. But my point is, going back to what I was saying earlier, my point is that the Mets have no shot. And the Mets don't know how to buy correctly, but they could sell correctly. If you have no shot of winning a championship anyway, what's the point of, what's the point of what's the point of buying? There's too many holes on this team to fix. Buying is an option if there was only 1 or 2 holes, but the Mets need multiple starting pitchers who can give you depth as well as be good. They need big help in a bullpen. They need big help in a bullpen. They need hitters who can situationally hit, which also means the Mets have to fire their hitting coaches and start to teach fundamentals again, because I swear the Mets have no fundamentals. There's just too many holes on his team to fix. And I'd rather that David Stearns and Steve Cohen admit that they made a mistake and that this whole thing was a disaster by selling, rather than insist that they're doing the right thing, buy marginally, and badly miss the playoffs. I'd rather the Mets just punt the season away altogether Besides, there have been so many games this season where the Mets just punted to their opponent. And I'm not talking about games where, Mendoza made a bad decision, but the Mets were clearly trying to win. I'm not talking about games where he got overconfident. I'm talking about games where they full on punted. This game where you had Tidwell make his debut in game 1 of the doubleheader, the Mets punted that game. And seeing as they lost game 2 of the doubleheader, it really didn't go well as the Mets slide began. The Mets didn't really punt too many games in April. You have what was it? This game against the White Sox where Canning implodes, and then you look at what the Mets' plan was. It was very wonky. So the Mets are down 5-3 after 3 innings after they fall into a 5-0 hole, and you could punt the game, and they do by using Waddell to just mop up the innings. I mean, Waddell starts to implode down the stretch, and then you use Stanek, who isn't very good. He's 2-5, and his ERA is, I think, in the upper 4s right now. Not upper 4s, but still. You have Stanek, who's a decently high leverage guy, and in the ninth you use him. Like, why not continue to use Waddell at that point? Unless there's a strict pitch limit. The Mets, really any Paul Blackburn start in June where they lost was really a punt game considering how bad Blackburn was. The Mets punted this game by using spot starters. I think they used Tidwell against the Phillies. Tidwell actually held up on his own for a while. Then Reed Garrett shot the bed. The Mets lost this game because they decided to use Zach Poop, which I get that you had won the first 2 out of 3, but when you're slumping, you cannot be popping games. You punt on July 10th by using a bullpen game with Tidwell and Hagenman. Who would have known that would have failed? Who would have possibly guessed? The Mets have just punted so many games. And I'll say this, if you keep punting games, you gotta be prepared to punt the season as well. This is a very winnable season for the Mets, where they came in with championship aspirations, but the Mets really should sell at the deadline. Plus, selling at the deadline doesn't totally mean that your season's over. The Mets could still go on a run, but retooling and rebuilding 2026 is far more important than trying to make the playoffs in 2025 just to be humiliated in the wild card round. Now, I think Cohen and Stearns both lied about their fandom, and they're both really Yankees fans. Either that, or they're just clueless and negligent. But it's still disturbing.